So, back from the Brink, Connecticut, started here about a year ago. We meet monthly on Zoom on the fourth Thursday starting at 5 p.m. I encourage people here to join those meetings. Since we started, we've met with two congressional representatives, Joe Courtney and John Larson, to advocate their supporting House Res 77, a bill supporting the International Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. John Larson signed on. We've also conducted an open letter campaign, held Hiroshima and Nagasaki remembrance events, as well as other actions promoting elimination of nuclear weapons. We're glad you all can join us for our first open meeting. This really came about because after a year on Zoom, I think it was Ann said it would be nice to actually meet each other. We're glad you joined us for this meeting because today we plan to kick off our 2025 push to meet with all 5 of the Connecticut representatives to get them to sign on to the parallel legislation that Representative Jim McGovern will introduce in the new session of Congress. First, we'll hear from Ira Helfand, an international leader of the abolition movement. He'll help us understand the urgency of the moment and then suggest what we here in Connecticut can do to make abolition happen. After that, we'll be breaking up into groups, working groups by congressional district, to plan our next step in making abolition happen. Ira's local support is remarkable given his international stature in the abolition movement. Ira is a co-founder and past president of Physicians for Social Responsibility, PSR, the immediate past president of International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, IPPNW, and a member of the International Steering Group of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN. He is truly blessed with acronyms. Ira has published extensively, has represented IPPNW and ICAN at the UN General Assembly, before the US Homeland Security Committee, and at the French Senate, the Turkish Parliament, and the Israeli Knesset. If the peace movement has a rock star, Ira Helfand is it. Ira has provided exceptional support back from the Brink, Connecticut. He attends our Zoom meetings, has joined our meetings with congressional representatives, and has made himself available to speak on multiple occasions. So here we go. This is Ira.
If I'm a rock star, we were in big trouble. Thank you for that very kind introduction, Eric. I want to talk, I think probably most of you have heard me talk about what's going to happen to the world if there's a nuclear war, so I'm not going to do that today. I want to talk a little bit about the political climate that we're working in, and maybe set some background for the conversations we're going to be having in our breakout groups about how we move this whole process forward. Just a technical detail, we are going to have a new resolution in Congress to follow on HRS 77. We had hoped it would be introduced at this point already. It has not been. I have copies here with me, which I will make available to all of you, of the text that has been proposed for this resolution. And I believe this is the text that will be submitted, but I will caution you, Congressman McGovern hasn't brought it to the office in Congress yet. There may be some tweaks to the language between now and then. So use this for reference, but don't put this out as a public document because it may not be the final form. We certainly hope that that will be available by the end of this week or the end of next week at the absolute latest. I had a chance to meet with Congressman McGovern last week in Northampton. He had a town meeting, and I just want to share this with you. It's not directly related to what we're talking about, but there were 1,000 people at that town meeting. It was unbelievable. There was incredible energy and a real determination on the part of a very large group of people. I was stunned. I thought there'd be a couple of hundred who are determined to try to resist what's going on right now in this country. And I guess that is a segue to do what I want to talk about, because we do need to be planning our current work in the context of what's going on right now. And there are two aspects, I think, of the situation that we need to look at. One is explicitly what Trump is saying and doing about nuclear weapons. And secondly, the broader political context that we're going to be operating in. Let me talk to that question first. I think what the big challenge that we face right now is simply that everyone is so distracted by so many critical issues that it is going to be important for us to keep our focus on the nuclear weapons question. And this is going to be tough. I mean, when I wake up in the morning, I look at my news feed, and I'm looking at what he's doing to kids who are separated from their parents, who are here illegally, firing people who have been working hard for the government for 20 years, undermining USA, eliminating USAID, and so on. And these things are enormously important, and they're enormously compelling, and people who are inclined to be concerned about nuclear weapons are also very concerned for the most part about these issues, and appropriately are wanting to take action on them. But people only have so much bandwidth. So how do we make sure that even as people address all these other critically important issues, they don't lose sight of the nuclear weapons issue? And I think that's going to be really, in many ways, our central challenge, certainly in the months ahead and probably for the next 4 years. And it's going to be tough. I mean, it really is. We all feel torn, I think, between the urgent need to prevent nuclear war and the urgent need to stop the fascist coup d'etat which is unfolding here in the United States. And I don't think there's really any other way of accurately describing what's happening right now. Which in some ways might make it difficult to do one of our most important jobs, which is to try to make nuclear abolition a bipartisan issue, as it has been in the past and should be. And well, many of us personally and in other organizations we may belong to find ourselves in very vigorous opposition to the current administration. Given the hyperpolarized nature of the political climate in this country, it's going to be somewhat hard perhaps to reach across the aisle. That brings me to the second point, which is that Trump has given us something of an opening to do just that, to reach across the aisle on this issue. He has, at least at the rhetorical level, done some remarkable things about nuclear weapons. He, during the campaign, for the first time in decades, spoke during the presidential campaign about the danger of nuclear war, about World War III. He has given a press, well, at one of his Oval Office press briefings a week ago Thursday, he said that he wanted to enter into talks with Russia and China for denuclearization, that we had enough weapons to destroy the world 50 to 100 times over. We didn't need more, we should have less. I mean, this is something we could have written for him. And it is important that we understand that this is not something new for Donald Trump. Getting rid of nuclear weapons has been an obsession of his since the 1980s. He asked, in the 86 I believe it was, he asked Ronald Reagan to appoint him as special ambassador to Moscow to negotiate a treaty to eliminate nuclear weapons. He had no standing to do this. He was a real estate guy in Manhattan. He wasn't a diplomat. He knew nothing about nuclear weapons, and he got turned down in his request. But he was talking about this 40 years ago, and he's talked about it not infrequently since then. I don't personally have any strong feeling that he's going to deliver on this, because there are some other things that he says and does all the time that need to be looked at too. The budget which he's introduced into Congress for the Defense Department does not cut defense spending as he said we should do in the Oval Office last Thursday. It asks for $100 billion more even than the huge budget which the Pentagon already has. The 2025 platform, which seems to be the blueprint for his entire administration, calls for the United States to build more nuclear weapons, not fewer, in the mistaken idea that we need to have as many as Russia and China combined. And it also advocates for the resumption of explosive nuclear testing in the atmosphere. Not underground testing, but atmospheric testing. And I think it's not at all clear which way Trump is going to go. Personally, I think that even if he were inclined to try to get rid of nuclear weapons, the very hawkish people that he surrounded himself with, especially those from the 2025 project, would be whispering in his ear, Don, that's going to make you look weak. And this all goes back, I think, to his psychology. He wants to get rid of nuclear weapons because he thinks that'll make him the greatest person in history. He wants to get the Nobel Peace Prize. He's been very explicit about how unfair it is. Everything's unfair to Donald Trump. How unfair it is that Obama got the Peace Prize and he didn't. And he clearly wants it, and he knows this is the way he would get it. But Donald Trump also is absolutely obsessed, with being a tough guy. I mean, this is his persona. He's got to be the toughest guy in the room, and his definition of tough usually involves a lot of bravado and rhetoric and bullying people who can't fight back. I think when push comes to shove, he has to choose between being the great peacemaker and being the tough guy. I think he's going to come down on the tough guy's side. But we don't know. I mean, he could surprise us. He could be the Reagan of our moment and be the person who really makes a significant overture to Russia and China and leads to some significant reduction in nuclear weapons. We can't plan on it. We shouldn't plan on it. But we can take advantage of the fact that he's saying it should be done. And I think that's really important. We do need to try as best we can to reach out to those people on the Republican side of the aisle who are reachable. And I think this is our opening to do that. Their leader has said that we have more nuclear weapons than we need, we should get rid of them. It's okay for them to say the same thing. This is going to be, I think, really important, because if the abolition of nuclear weapons becomes a progressive democratic issue, it will not be successful. The progressive and the Democratic Party does not have the ability to bring this about by itself. And it shouldn't be seen that way. There's nothing about getting rid of nuclear weapons that should be the property of one or another wing of our political spectrum. We're talking about the survival of the human race. Everybody should support this. And historically, that's been the case. Some of our most important arms control agreements were negotiated by Republican presidents. The Freeze campaign in the 80s had leadership from both Republican and Democratic members of the House and members of the Senate. And that kind of bipartisan support for this effort is a really important goal for us to be aiming for. So, in conclusion, I would just say, I think we're going to have to be very careful in what we do in the coming period of time. We're going to have to try to figure out how we work across the entire political spectrum at a time when that spectrum is being polarized and divided by the events coming out of Washington. And it's not going to be an easy task. But I think that the way that we will succeed is by focusing, as always, on the facts, the reality, what's going to happen if nuclear weapons are used. Historically, these conversations have tended to take place in the abstract, in terms that derive from game theory. And in that way, you get into this kind of conversation about, well, if the other side has X, we need to have Y. And you end up where we are today. If you reframe the whole conversation and make it fundamentally based in a discussion of what is going to happen if these weapons are used, that is to say, basing it in reality rather than game theory, you get a different conversation. And when people understand what's going to happen when nuclear weapons are used, they almost invariably come to the conclusion that they should be eliminated. So I think that's our strong suit. That's what we need to build from. And if we do that, I think we can make some really significant progress. So that's what I would offer as my take on where we are as we move into this process. Again, I hope we're going to have the House resolution in formal form by the end of next week, the week after this at the very latest, hopefully the end of this week. And as soon as we do, by the way, we will be meeting with the offices of several members of the Senate who we've spoken to already about trying to get a Senate companion resolution introduced as well. Great. If there are any questions about what I said, I'd be happy to try to answer. Yeah.
Yeah, when it comes to Joe Courtney, and I think when it comes to nuclear weapons, there's not a nickel's worth of difference between the Republicans and the Democrats. They're both bought and paid for. Joe Courtney, I don't know what he signed, but when he ran in November, one of his slogans was, Joe Courtney, he doesn't get involved in partisan bickering, he just works. I mean, that's a nice slogan. But all he said for like 2 months is how he supports all these great jobs at Electric Boat, which is the bulwark of Eastern Connecticut, the economy. And like, what's he gonna do? I mean, as Eisenhower said, beware of the military-industrial complex. If you remember back when Bush was president, during the the build-up to the Iraq War. The Bush administration and the Department of the Navy, they wanted to combine electric boat and Newport News. So, you know, save money. But everything was going to be moved to Virginia, I think. And all the congressmen in Connecticut, Democrat and Republican, they all ran to Washington to lobby. It was Chris Shays, Nancy Johnson, Sam Gadenson, all of them ran to Washington to get on their knees and kiss the feet of George Bush. And they lobbied successfully, and then the Bush administration said, nah, this idea about combining electric boat and Newport News, you know, we're going to keep them separate. And like I'm saying, like in every congressional district in the United States, there's usually a defense contractor. And what it is that, you know, it doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or Republican, they're all bought and paid for. You have to support that that defense contractor in your district.
Yeah.
It's all about the money.
I mean, they've tried very hard to do exactly that. You know, the description of the perfect weapons system is one which has a component manufactured in every congressional district in the country to make it foolproof, so that it can't be taken apart. Despite that, there are many members of Congress who have been willing to say we need to cut the defense budget and we need to get rid of nuclear weapons. And I think we need to work with all of them. For someone like Courtney, whose district is so dependent on defense spending, it's going to be more difficult to bring them on board. But I think we should try. I think we should, because obviously that argument is fundamentally flawed. In the short term, it makes sense. I mean, what are these people going to do if they suddenly lose their jobs? We're worried about all the people losing their jobs at USAID. People at Electric Boat, what's going to happen to them? Well, what needs to happen is there needs to be a conversion plan. And the people at Electric Boat could be making marine wind turbines to solve the energy crisis instead of nuclear submarines. There's no plan to make that kind of conversion. And one of the things that the new Back from the Brink bill includes, which the old one didn't, is a specific resolve clause calling on the U.S. government to set up a commission to come up with a definitive plan for a just conversion of people who have been employed in weapons manufacture so that they are now employed in things that are socially useful. And I think, you know, again, you're quite right. There are some members of Congress who are not going to be on our side because of these economic conditions. We need to work with them as best we can, and we need to focus on the people who are more able to do the right thing. Yeah.
I concur with all the statements that you've made, and I would like to hear what your opinion is of how the other nuclear powers would be integrated into this. In particular, England, France, North Korea, Israel, Pakistan, India, and also the breakout countries, you know, such as South Korea, Iran, there's a number of others, and how these would fit into negotiations, and how the main powers, China, Russia, and the United States, would view their integration into these negotiations.
I don't think that any of the nuclear weapon states, with the possible exception of the United Kingdom, are going to give up their nuclear weapons unless there's an agreement amongst all of them to do it, which agreement is verifiable and enforceable and has a specific timetable. And that's why, you know, we've structured the Back from the Brink platform the way we have. That's our key request, that the U.S. enter into these negotiations with all of the nuclear weapon states to bring about this agreement. I think that in that process, the position of the three major powers, US, Russia, and China, is going to be very important, and that they're probably going to have to play a leading role. And the way I personally see this playing out is if we can convince the US leadership to adopt this strategy, this approach to the nuclear issue, I hope that the US leader, whoever it is at the time, will reach out to Putin and Xi or their successors in the same way that Gorbachev reached out to Reagan, and sit down with them and have a very frank conversation. That the path we're on right now is going to lead to all of us being destroyed. We need to do something fundamentally different, and we need to bring all of the nuclear weapon states together in negotiations. Now, some of those states are going to be particularly hard to bring on board. North Korea Pakistan, and Israel all believe that they face existential threats and that they're to the survival of their countries, and that nuclear weapons provide them with some element of protection. They're wrong in that thinking, but that thinking is deeply entrenched. And we're going to have to, I think, come up with some way of satisfying their security concerns in order for them to be able to feel that they can give up their nuclear weapons. I think we can do that. I mean, North Korea has held that as the most difficult, perhaps. And I think it's important for us to remember that North Korea did make an agreement with the United States in the 1990s to stop its nuclear weapons program, and it stopped it. It was in full compliance with that agreement when George Bush became president, and on day one of his presidency terminated the agreement, and a year later branded North Korea as part of the axis of evil. Whether we can recreate the trust we were able to build in the 1990s with the North Koreans, it's obviously going to be much harder given everything that's happened since then, but there's at least that historical experience that they were willing to give up their nuclear program for appropriate security assurances. If those assurances are coming not just from the United States, but from China and Russia as well, and if China and Russia are also saying, if you don't agree to this, we're not going to shield you from the UN sanctions anymore, I think we could bring North Korea along. And there's going to have to be a similar examination of the factors at play with Pakistan and with Israel. Russia is also going to be tough, because at the moment, Russia's nuclear arsenal is the only thing that makes Russia a major player in the world. Its economy is a mess. It has a large landmass, but it's not that large a country in terms of its population or its economy. And the thing that gives it standing in the world is its nuclear arsenal. So we're going to have to figure out how to address that. And we're going to have to figure out how to address that in a way that does not sacrifice the interests of the people who find themselves living on Russia's borders.
So where is the line between nuclear weapons, nuclear power, getting rid of that substance, and safely doing it where? And if we get rid of the weapons and people keep the power generation, what's to prevent them from coming back together?
Yeah. I think they're slightly different, because I think we could have an agreement that eliminates the nuclear weapons that exist in a verifiable way before the nuclear power plants all come offline. But I think what you're suggesting is exactly right. There's an intimate connection between these two technologies. And as long as we have nuclear power plants, the technology, the resources to build new nuclear weapons exist. And it's one of the many reasons why we shouldn't have nuclear power either. But I think it is possible and probably necessary for us to confront the nuclear weapons question first. I mean, there are many countries that have nuclear power that do not have nuclear weapons and have no intention of building them. It's not a stable situation. They could change their minds in the future, and for that and many other reasons, it would be better if they got rid of their nuclear power plants. But I think we should probably focus on the weapons first, because they are clearly the more immediate and graver threat. Yeah.
Well,
Oh, excuse me a second. I'm sorry. Just you asked one other question, which is what we do with all the stuff afterwards. Yeah. We don't know. Nobody knows. I mean, that's a huge problem which we have created, and we have no solution to, and it's yet another one of the arguments why we shouldn't have either nuclear weapons or nuclear power. We have no idea what to do with this intensely radioactive material that we have created, and which poses an enormous threat to public health, and will continue to for hundreds, and in case of plutonium, thousands of years. All of our brilliant nuclear scientists who are currently building nuclear weapons should be focused on that problem, how to get rid of the waste. We don't have the answer to it yet.
So the U.S. is currently replacing some of the nuclear weapons with newer ones that are. How are those weapons an improvement over what's already there, and why is it? Why do they want to do that?
Well, the new generations of weapons that they're building mainly, and this is quite alarming, are designed to be more usable. They have better navigation systems. They are designed to be used against selective targets, and they're really undermining this divide, helping to erase this boundary that has existed between conventional and nuclear weapons until now. And it's a very dangerous aspect of the whole process. I mean, some of these weapons are smaller than the ones that they're replacing. That sounds good, but it's not if they're smaller because they're more accurate, and so you can do the same damage with a smaller weapon and do it more reliably and therefore have a more usable weapon. And that is part of the drift in the United States, in Russia, I think in China as well. They're all looking at how they make weapons that they can actually use, which is very disturbing.
Yep, thanks.
Do we have time?
Yeah, one more.
One more question.
Is knowledge about what will happen if nuclear weapons explode going into the schools? I mean, middle school, high school. I remember when I was a kid, you know, we learned about it, but I don't know if it was from teachers, but you would think that that would be an elemental thing that ought to be taught.
Yeah. At this moment, it's not. There's a gigantic problem in that the younger generation has not been taught about nuclear war at all. And when you talk to young people, even very smart and well-educated young people, they really don't know anything about nuclear war for the most part. That is starting to change. One of the most positive developments in Back from the Brink world over the last year has been the launching of Students for Nuclear Disarmament, this new organization based on high school campuses and college campuses. And it is growing rapidly. This week I spoke at Quinnipiac on Monday. We have a new chapter there. I spoke at Vassar on Wednesday, and we have a large new chapter there. And there are many other chapters around the country that are in formation. In addition, there's been a big emphasis on developing educational materials about nuclear war. PBS, through WGBH in Boston, has put together this really impressive suite of materials that can be used in classrooms. They're very clear. This is not a course. It's not even a module in a course. It's a series of supplemental materials that a teacher can introduce into a history course or an ethics course or an economics course that focus on nuclear weapons. And they're really good. They held a webinar about 3 weeks ago to present this material to the general public. The webinar was incredibly well done. And if you go to, I'm trying to think if it's on the Back from the Brink website yet. I think we've got a link to this on the Back from the Brink website, preventnuclearwar.org. If you go to the GBH website for Boston, PBS, I'm sure you can find it there. And these things, there are some videos that are terrific. There's some interactive class plans that are really superb. It's great stuff. So there's a lot of interest at this point in how do we correct that big omission in current education.
Let's do one more over here. You've had a chance, Jerry.
You mentioned about the nuclear in Chernobyl, that was 25, almost 30 years ago. That plant is still active. And now that Putin was coming into Ukraine to fight, he told them to stay away from there because it's active. The grass, everything is just getting rid of the nuclear. So the nuclear energy never goes away. Once it's there, it stays.
No, it does. It stays for a very, very long time. Strontium 90 and cesium 130, which are the two radioactive elements that have the biggest impact on human health, both have a half-life of 30 years, which means that they need to be contained for 10 to 20 half-lives, 300 to 600 years. Plutonium has a half-life of 24,000 years, and really needs to be restricted from the environment for 250,000 years, which is, you know, one of the most mind-boggling figures. Human history, recorded history, is about 10,000 years, and we have created something which we have essentially need to guarantee the safety of for a period of time that is 25 times longer than human history. It is an extraordinary act of arrogance to have done this. We have no idea what's going to happen to this stuff in the future. It's a very good point you made.